you very much. Today we are going to be hearing some great insights here on stage, but you are all vital to the conversations we're going to have. So we'll be doing some polling to get your thoughts. And if you could all humour me by whipping out your phones, and I'm going to show you how it works. Please scan the QR code up here on screen, or it's also on your badges. And you can respond to polls in this way, or you can also send in a question for our moderators. So let's practice. Please, everyone, take out your phones and let's have a go. First poll of the day is going to be coming up very shortly. I'm going to give you a few moments to register. Perhaps if you can just give me a bit of a thumbs up when you're ready and everyone's done that, that would be helpful. Okay, everyone's registered and successfully connected? Yeah? I'm seeing a few nods and thumbs up there, so I'll take that as a yes. Okay, so the first question is a tough one. Please use one word to describe how you perceive the current investment landscape. And your answers are going to be shown on a word cloud here on the screen. So please, one word to describe how you perceive the current investment landscape. Okay, I'm seeing volatile. Dr. Sung, what would your one word be?
Safer.
Safe, okay.
It's getting safer. Yeah.
Safer, all right. Yeah. What makes you say that?
Well, I think we were looking into the abyss, just a few years ago. All sorts of nightmare scenarios. But looks like most of those were overdone. And I think we are on a pretty good path to recovery. So I'm even though professionally I work as a risk manager most of my career, I like to be an optimist. Okay. So I like to see the brighter side of things. So I do find that things are getting better, getting safer.
I'm not sure many of our audience agree with you. I'm seeing volatile, choppy, challenging, unpredictable, clueless. Okay, all right, well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts. And by the way, there is access to closed captioning on the screens to my left and my right, and through the event app that we just used for the polling. So let's get started. Dr. Sung, in your career, you've either worked for or served as a board member or had close interactions with many of the world's leading sovereign wealth funds, life insurers, pension funds, an extraordinary spectrum. So I'm curious, in your experience, how do the portfolio construction approaches of entities like defined benefit pension funds and life insurers on the one hand, differ from those of sovereign wealth funds, particularly in relation to their investment strategies and their appetite for alternative investments?
I think there are probably two key factors. One is whether they have explicit or hard liabilities that have to manage against. So you mentioned DB pension, life insurance companies. Those are definitely, they have to work against the liabilities. The other is a related issue of regulation. Generally, the rule is that if there are lots of stakeholders, policyholders, DB pension plan members, that regulation is more onerous. Whereas if you, let's say, sovereign fund, basically you have one client, the government, or you are a family office, you generally enjoy the much larger degrees of freedom in what you do. So, which also, generates challenges of its own, because in the absence of external scrutiny, intervention, Really it's up to the organization to, provide internal governance, right? Because no governance is a very dangerous situation. Yeah.
Exactly. I wanted to drill down a little bit into sovereign wealth funds. When we were chatting earlier, you were saying that they tend to sometimes write their own rules. What factors contribute to the greater investment freedoms that sovereign wealth funds have? And how does that influence their ability to pursue alternative investment strategies?
Well, like I said, sovereign wealth funds they're generally not regulated in the home country, right? And there's only usually just one big stakeholder, the government itself. But there's a tremendous information asymmetry that knowledge about global investments, risk, and so on is concentrated in the sovereign wealth funds, whereas agencies that could be, in theory, overseeing the SWF generally do not have people who are knowledgeable or competent to supervise the sovereign fund, right? So it's a situation where the sovereign entity would have to, sort of take on a lightened self-interest and fill the void on its own initiative, right? So I've experienced that in the few sovereign funds I'm closest to. Here in Singapore, GIC, in Norway, Norges Bank, and a few I've helped several other sovereign funds in Asia, like the KIC in Korea, the CIC, SAFE in China, and so on. And most of them, I would say, have done that rather well, right? Just because there are no external pressure, right? They could see that it's in their own interest to fill the governance gap. Right? But even if that is well done, they still enjoy a lot more freedom than most other investors. I didn't realize that when I was working at GIC, right? It was only when I left and I said, wow, all these other investors, they're subject to so many rules and regulations. And some of them, I would say, I didn't have the wisdom to see why they were good regulations, but nonetheless, they form binding constraints on these financial institutions. Right? So looking back, that was the best part of my career, but I didn't realize it until after I left. Yeah.
With that sort of greater freedom that the sovereign wealth funds have in today's sort of complex, complicated geopolitical environment, do you think on balance that's an advantage?
It definitely is. But what I also see is that the pure sovereign wealth fund is sort of on the decline. And more of them have taken on the character of national development funds, right? I think GIC, is, I hope my ex-colleagues don't mind me mentioning them, that they have to stay true, right? So they are pure asset manager. They do, in fact, they're not even allowed to invest in Singapore, let alone, intervene in the local or interact with the local economy. But in many other countries, say even Norway, right, that takes governance to a very high level, but the government would give them a mandate to make policy directed investments, like in renewable energy, that is not really necessarily in line with the general investment needs. Yeah? And even more so, I think if you look at the sovereign funds in the Middle East, right? And more and more they are assuming the role of development funds in the home country. Yeah. It's not wrong, but it's just that it gets a lot more challenging.
I wanted to move the conversation a little bit toward family offices, which is obviously a very important part of the financial landscape in this part of the world increasingly. What would you say are the key rules of engagement that family offices typically follow when constructing their investment portfolios? And how do those sort of guidelines and principles that they follow differ from those that might govern more regulated entities?
I think it's such a heterogeneous sector. It's very hard to speak of norms, right? I think the only thing that they share in common is that they are controlled by families, right? But the degree of institutionalization, professionalism, investment philosophy that they espouse is the widest range possible, right? It's very different from, let's say, pension funds or insurance companies or endowments, right? Because the purposes are very, very similar, right? But for the families, their motivations, the objectives could be very different, right? So I'm at a loss when I'm asked by friends to say, they want to engage the family office sector. What's the best way of doing so? See, I don't know, even though I sit on the board of Wealth Management Institute and we are, the host to the family office ecosystem here in Singapore. I haven't found a good way of actually engaging them in a uniform way. It's almost like you have to get to know them one by one. Right?
I mean, I would say the family offices perhaps in this part of the world are younger than in other geographies. Is that a benefit when you're interacting and engaging with them? Are they sort of more looser or open to different investment strategies and ideas?
Yes, they're more open, but I think the question is are they systematic? Are they being consistent? Is there method in the madness, right? So sometimes, obviously, I should mention that some of the family offices are very professionally and very competently managed, but also the great number of them that are, you don't know what is the modus operandi. It's decision making seems to be arbitrary. Right? So I find it difficult to speak in generality about family offices. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you about another area.
So maybe I could turn the question around. So I was recently asked by one of the local real estate family to make suggestions of how they improve the way they manage the family office. So I said, look, even though the circumstances are very different, but it'd be profitable for them to look at how the best managed and best governed big pension funds and sovereign funds, how they operate, how they set up the, say, the policy of investment statement, how they make explicit, what they believe in, and how those investment beliefs translate into investment decision making, right? So I was fortunate in this instance. The principals, they saw the value in this approach, and I think more family offices perhaps could look at how these big funds, the better ones, how they have evolved these practices. Right?
Yeah, and learn from that. I also wanted to ask you about another area which also isn't as developed in Asia, and that's endowment funds. And of course you were on the advisory board at MIT, which is one of the world's biggest endowment funds. Their approach to asset allocation and asset selection, right down to the outsourcing of investment managers, can be quite unique. So how does the structure of endowment funds influence their appetite for some of the more unconventional investment strategies?
Okay, I think the MIT people would be very happy when they're described as one of the biggest. They're not. They're only about 35 billion. whereas the larger ones are 50 billions or above. But until I retired 2 years ago, in fact, they were among the best performing. Right? I think the last couple of years, nothing to do with my departure, I think the investment environment has become a little bit tougher, so performance has suffered a little bit. But I think they typify, right, what had made the leading U.S. endowments stand out, right? And I think a lot of other funds have tried to emulate them, but they emulate in what they could see, but not the spirit of doing things, right? So what people see from the outside is that there's a high allocation to alternatives. They have the willingness to take more concentrated bets, and so that has been sort of been copied the world around, right? But what is my personal experience is that they tend to stay away from crowded markets, crowded strategies. They want to be early, right? They I'll give you an example, right? MIT has this program for investing, seeding emerging managers, right from the day one, right? So the youngest guy I think that is seeded was 23 years old, right? But instead of asking for big chunk of equity, what they ask for is future investment capacity. Right? So it's a call option. If they turn out to be as well as they hope they would be, they would be assured, right? They can put in a lot more capital into the fund, right? So that's the way they think. And there's usually very little discussion about global macros or geopolitics, right? The investments that they make are supposed to be, in a way, all-weather. I hope Ray Dalio doesn't sue me for using his all-weather analogy. So it's a whole different way of thinking, which was also what attracted me to want to serve on their board as a non-alumni. Usually it's the alumni that feel the loyalty and want to do something for the alma mater. But I was attracted to them precisely because they operate so differently from everybody else, right?
The endowment funds that we're seeing grow here in Singapore, because there are increasingly more of them, are they adopting those same sorts of principles and the same shape of their thinking?
I'm not sure whether they're doing things that are similar, but being an outsider, I can't say for sure they're doing those same things for the same reasons.
Right. Well, Dr. Sung, we're just pretty much out of time. I did just want to quickly throw it open to the audience to see if there are any questions out there. So please use your app to send in some questions. And we'll just give it a couple of minutes. Perhaps while we're just waiting for any questions, in terms of the endowment funds that we are seeing here in Singapore, what are some of their, if you're not inside of them, but their newer strategies or their investment approaches that you're finding quite interesting?
I don't have those kind of insights into what they do, but since many of the people working for the bigger endowments here are my friends, I think they are pretty much doing the right things, right? It's focusing on asset allocation, focusing on manager selection, right? And staying away from the temptation of making single stock investments or market timing or dabbling in currency and so on, right? So I will say my understanding that the local endowments are all very competently managed.
Okay, well, that is good to hear. I do have a couple of questions here, so I'm just going to read this one out. With the Japan government active effort in venture capital, do you think the Japanese VC space, being so early, has a chance to take off in the near future?
Oof, I'm not an expert in that field at all. I wouldn't be able to give you an intelligent response to that.
Okay. Well, I won't let you quite off the hook. I do have one more. What is your outlook for the Singapore asset management industry for the short term?
For the short term, it will stay the same. Well, I think we have been actually, running into headwinds, right? Because if you look at, we're not the best place for quant investing. Why? Because we don't have nearly as many talents. Right? There are a few quant managers that have gained prominence, but I think they struggle to hire the right people. A lot of the equity fund managers here have a China focus, either directly or indirectly. And that market has been in the doldrums, right, for nearly 10 years now, right? And hopefully we are turning the corner on that one, but I'm not holding my breath on that. So it's very tough. I applaud those fund managers that are persevering in such a tough environment. Same with PE. Right? The easy money era is over. And if you are, focusing on Southeast Asia, the picking is slim, right? There aren't as many good companies that fall under your investment criteria. So,
time will tell. Well, look, on that note, we are out of time. So, Dr. Sung, thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you for joining me. And please join me in thanking Dr. Sung for his insights. Thank you. Thank you very much.